Hello, my fellow extraordinary Americans. My name is Cosmos Dar, and this is Extraordinary America. What is Extraordinary America? Well, you see, America has always been about freedom, opportunity, and the pursuit of happiness. However, most Americans are not free when it comes to the financial front. Most Americans are suffering from financial slavery due to loss of jobs, stagnant wages, inflation, and debt. Wealth and income inequality is the norm now, and the middle class has all but disappeared. So Extraordinary America is about the abolition of financial slavery. It is about the financial freedom of the 99%. It is about the nation of immigrants and the descendant of immigrants restoring the extraordinary within themselves and setting themselves free. The path to financial freedom is through financial education. It is through becoming entrepreneurs and investors on the light side. In this podcast, I interview fellow Americans who fought against the odds. Many of them came from humble beginnings to see how they did it. It is my hope through these interviews that the extraordinary within you shall awaken and that you will abolish financial slavery from your life and realize the American dream. Once again, welcome to Extraordinary America. Welcome back to the show, my fellow extraordinary Americans. For today's guest, I have Phillip Lanos. Phillip is an entrepreneur, consultant, digital marketer, author, and podcaster. He was previously the host of Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine podcasts and is also the author of a personal development book called Pushing Past the Norm, which is available on Barnes& and Nobles and Amazon. He has done over 2,000 podcast interviews with some of the world's most successful CEOs, entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists. His expertise in personal branding and podcast consulting, which includes working with notable figures such as Cal Fussman and Emmy Morin, along with his ability to help marketing agencies solve their quality of talent issues in their ranks, solidify his position as a top-tier talent in the industry. He's also involved with business organizations like Entrepreneur Organization, which is a global network of elite entrepreneurs with 167 chapters worldwide. I'm really honored to have him on the show, and I'm grateful that he's chosen to come interview with us. Hey, Phillip, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Phillip, thank you so much for coming to this show. I'm really honored to interview you.
I'm really excited to be here, man. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I know that you're an entrepreneur, consultant, podcaster, and you're part of digital marketing. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you got started?
Sure. Are we talking, we want to go way back
The
or,
entire, the whole deal, the whole nine. Yeah.
okay. Some important things to know about me. I'm one of 18 children, my older sister being my full sibling, everyone else being a half sibling. My father was an immigrant from Mexico. My mother was an American woman. Uh, my father got ALS full blown, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, by the time I was 8 years old. So he wasn't really able to care for me much. And to make matters worse, we were really poor, and my mom wasn't around because she herself was a runaway and sort of fell into drugs. And she tried. There was a few years later where I got a chance to get to know her when I was like 12 or so, from 10 to 12, I think up to 14. So like 4 years of my life that I actually got to get to know her. And she tried really hard, but she had her own problems that she was still dealing with. Right. So all that to say that the odds seem stacked against me. I spent a lot of my childhood passed from home to home in a way where it was like, it's another mouth to feed. What are we going to do? It's not our kid, that kind of thing. I'm just watching all this happen. And somewhere around the age of 14, my mom herself told me, she's like, yeah, it seems like you just love that other side of your family more than you love our family. And I could hear the pain in her voice. I wasn't old enough to understand what was going on yet, but she sent myself and my older sister on a Greyhound bus, just like from another state over back to California. I think we were in Texas, San Antonio at the time. And it was there that I came across a book called The Four Agreements when I landed back in Los Angeles, just by chance. And I read it, and it wasn't the Four Agreements per se that helped me sort of let go of some of this anguish and confusion and anger that I was feeling because I just didn't know why this had to be the way it was. It's not the worst story in the world, but it's certainly an interesting story. And it was the kind of story I was using as an excuse to be angry or to hate myself or, hate other people or just be upset. And it's not to say that I wasn't ever not, it's not that I didn't know how to smile. I just had an anger that I knew I had to deal with. And I just happened to come across this book, and the four agreements were interesting, and be impeccable with your word. Don't assume, don't take anything personal, and always do your best. That's fine. But it was in the reading of the book that I began to realize, as they were talking about the voice in our head that tends to shower guilt, blame, and relive bad experiences. I was like, yeah, I know that really well. And it was like, yeah, well, if you're the voice inside your head, who is the person that's listening? And at 14, literally rocked my world. I told myself, whoa, wait a minute. That's true. And when I began to realize I was the one that was listening, it started this chain of events where I started to let go of some of these frustrations that some people use as a chip on their shoulder as they go out into the world, and it creates friction, it gets in the way of their goals. And I'm not saying I'm completely cured from it, but it definitely helped me get by a lot better than I was before. I was really self-destructive up until that point. So that starts happening, and that book leads to another book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So that creates the sort of the nucleus of my identity at that time, really impressionable at 14. And they say when you're 14, and the science shows that's really where you start to develop the bulk of your personality. So I had the opportunity to do that. Sure, I was pursuing music and these other things at that time, but the core of my personality became that, right? That level of self-awareness, and then that ability to be dynamic and when interacting with people, thanks to Dale Carnegie's book. And so from there, I had trouble relating to kids in high school because suddenly I realized not everybody my age at that time was reading those things and taking them to heart and understanding them. They were more concerned with what outfits they were wearing, who liked who was going to go to the dance with who. And so to say that it was awkward in high school is an understatement, but because I liked music, I was really good at rapping, singing. I had gone to singing competitions. I was on Telemundo and a few other things. I try not to tell people about it because
Wow.
it's not who I am anymore. But I use that as a social crutch to help me interact with people because it was the only way they could relate to me and I to them, given how many other things were on my mind. So whatever, high school doesn't really go that well for me, and I don't have my parents at this time still. Like I'm already working at a pizza place at 14 and trying to earn my living and taking a bus from East Los
Wow.
Angeles all the way to West LA, 2 hours over, 2 hours back. Nobody was making me do this, but it's kind of like the responsible thing to do. So that's what I did. And it was during that time that I had decided, I don't know if I'm going to go to college. I tried applying, and college told me, hey, until you're 24, you can't file separately from your parents. And I told them, how do I explain this? I don't have my parents' information. They're not really available. And they're like, well, I don't know what to tell you. You got to wait till you're 24. I'm like, oh, okay. So I
Whoa.
work, I take jobs, I go into security guards, jobs, retail, coffee shops, background acting, you name it. I've had like 20 jobs by the time I was 24. Sometimes holding multiple jobs. And then I learned that doesn't mean multiple streams of income. and, uh, and eventually I did get a chance. I just decided I was going to pay for college. I was like, all right, I'm making enough money. I'll do that. Uh, and this is just before, things start going really interesting, right? I signed up for college. I take linguistic anthropology because I'm a language guy, and I'm taking acting classes at college, theater, philosophy, whatever. I kind of fail all the classes except the thing I was the most interested in, which was acting and linguistic anthropology. I got straight A's on all that, and I realized, wow, I really am not good at school, and I'm also paying for this. I have no interest in it, right? So I left that and started on a journey of trying to find a way to make things work. And this was still around, I was like 18 still at the time. My cousin tells me, hey, man, so my girl and I are going to move in together. So you're going to have to figure something else out. And I'm like, oh, okay. Would have been good to know instead of last minute. So I end up just sleeping in my car for like 2 weeks till I got my next paycheck. And then I got an apartment and I'm like, okay, you know what? I never really gave music a shot, like all in. So I gathered some friends. We started a rock band, and I'm going all in, but I'm older than them. They had just come out of high school like a year after, but I'm older than them in terms of like what I was already thinking. Right. So I had to struggle with the fact that they still wanted to go out and drink and hang out and party. And so it became a thing where eventually their parents were like, hey, by the way, if you guys want to keep doing this music thing, you're either going to move out or you're going to stay here and go to college. So that dream was sunk really fast. I tried it with another group of friends. Eventually, I just realized the people around me were not there yet where I was mentally. And it's not that I was better. That's not what I'm saying at all. They had other issues and other things that were priorities as opposed to the dream of being music, and the sacrifice it takes wasn't going to work. Right. So I'm like, what am I going to do? I try acting for a while, and that doesn't seem to pan out either. I can't seem to get a good enough agent. All the agents that I took on were kind of like, I found them in like the internet somewhere, and even though they were SAG franchise agents, which is important, they didn't have a great reputation. So it's either that or I just wasn't good enough. I like to believe that I'm pretty articulate with the craft. I studied it. I paid for singing lessons, acting lessons. I went all in because I said I don't want failure. I don't want my failure to be because of lack of effort. But it just didn't seem to pan out for me. It's not what life wanted. I would go, and back then cameras weren't ubiquitous. They weren't everywhere. You couldn't just buy a camera. It was expensive. So I went to go pay someone to help me make an audition tape and some kind of reel I could pass around. And as I'm talking to him, the way I'm to you now, he looks up from the camera and his name was uh, Neil Lahiri. And he goes, "Hey man, why do you want to be an actor?" I was like, "What do you mean?" It's because I want to be an actor, man. It looks like fun. Probably help solve a lot of my poverty problems from my background. He's like, "Yeah, but I feel like you have more to offer than being an actor, man." I was like, interesting. Well, I paid you, so let's finish this. And so whatever, he sends me home with the CDs. And I'm just thinking about that. At the time I ended up landing a job at a jewelry store because the owner of the jewelry store was a mentor to my sister, and her security guard had left. So I became security guard, and she sees me with all the books that I'm reading, you know, Think and Grow Rich, there was a few other books I was reading at the time, and probably not as popular. And she goes, "You're always reading. Instead of being a security guard, how would you like to be the store manager?" It's like, "What do you mean? I'm the youngest, I'm the only male, and I don't have a gemology degree." She's like, "Don't worry about that. You're good with people. You got a nice smile, you're polite, and you're educated." I was like, okay. So I took that up. I'm doing that, and I started realizing, business. Oh, making money. She sends me to the meetings at the mall, and I'm starting to see, oh, people with a lot of money act a lot different, not just in terms of like, how they carry themselves, but some of the values. If they come from money, like generations after, they also treat people who don't come from money differently. And I mean, I already knew it, but it's really ugly to see it in person, especially in jewelry stores. Uh, so eventually her store had to close down because the Grove, which was the name of the mall in Los Angeles, was really expensive to be in, and the customers just weren't coming in like they used to. So that closed up. And then I'm sitting there again, like, oh, what am I going to do? It felt just like when I was unemployed. I mean, when I was homeless before I got my apartment, when I was living in my car, except this time I was unemployed. I had some savings, but I had to figure something out. The music thing isn't working, acting isn't working. I can't seem to get a job that lasts long because it's always with some startup kind of thing, and corporations don't want to hire me because I've had so many jobs and they want to know. It's always something. I'm like, man, what is going on? It's school, work, everything. It's just it's I don't want to jinx myself, but it definitely felt like it's never easy for some reason. I just wish it was easier, but it just isn't the case. So I go to coffee shops every day and I'm applying. And while this is happening, I get the news that my dad actually had been fighting like a ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, for like 20 years, unheard of. But because he's a Mexican immigrant, science didn't take an interest in him. They just kind of, you know, we just had like people who weren't nurses looking after him, and he just kept fighting because he wanted to see his kids grow up. But eventually, it took a toll, and they didn't even tell me my dad died. What happened was, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, what happened is like 2015 at the time. they tell me, hey, you need to come see your dad. So I show up and I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" And there's a sheet over my dad's face, and I'm not told anything. I'm like, hey, dad, what's going on? I'm like, whoa, that's how I find out my dad died. And I'm like, oh, God, okay.
Wow.
I'm like, all right. So now I got to deal with this. I don't have time to sit there and process it because as far as they're concerned, they're like, well, it is what it is. It really sucks. And this is like my stepmom, but you can tell after 20 years of looking after him, and she didn't have her own life because she tried to look after him. Was a lady that he was with, not my actual mom, but you know, I'll call her mom because it's the right thing to do. And I have two half brother and sister with her. Um, you could tell she was in her own pain, and she's done enough. So I'm like, all right, I can't take any of this personal. I was like, okay. I start calling. I get that taken care of. I learn all about how, even though I'm the one reporting it, I'm still up for investigation. Like, what do you mean this guy died? Right? Are you sure? We need to find out it's not like you killed him or there's some like, okay,
Wait,
and so yeah, that's just how it goes. They're like, you're
that
the
is
one
that is wow.
they're like, you're reporting it. So, we got to get the coroner there and find out it wasn't something. I was like, look at my dad's body. You'll see that he's decayed over time. It's called atrophy. It comes from the body. It's a disease. You'll look it up. You'll see it. So I'm dealing with that. Eventually, they have me on hold. Like they have me waiting on location until, even though they took the body already, until the coroner shows up to ask me questions. The coroner never shows up. So I'm like, okay, so I waited for nothing, whatever. Then now that they take the body, now I gotta because they're like doing whatever biopsy or whatever autopsy, I think it's called. Sorry. Now I gotta go with my stepmom to go figure out what we're gonna do. Are we gonna bury him? Oh, it's $20,000. Okay, I don't have that. Uh, what are options? You can cremate him. That's 3,000. Okay, even I don't have that at the time, right? I just don't. And none of my dad's brothers, they all just prayed to God that one day things would get better. One day he'll be healed, and nobody really saved any money, And so it turns to a thing where I have to go to a GoFundMe, and it was embarrassing, but it helped. It did, And then later, a bunch of the neighbors and everyone who's ever known my dad when he was healthy shows up, and they all donate a couple dollars too. And then there's like this. I'm not traditionally religious or anything, nor do I have anything against it, but suddenly they're like, we have to pray for 7 days and I don't know why. And I'm just doing my best to like be polite and engage in everyone's need to heal and how they do it before I process my own grief. And then we secure the church, right? We secure the money necessary for the cremation. We do the viewing. And then that's when I find out the church is like, okay, well, your hour's up. I don't care. You guys got to clean up. It's like very like next dead body. It's like, I was like, wow,
Uh,
everything's a business. Then my aunts and uncles are like, hey, Philip, you tell him, we haven't even got a chance to see him. I'm like, hey, at this point, honestly, I think I've done my job here. You guys can handle the rest, and that's what it was. And it may not have been the nicest thing, but I needed my own space and time. And so I'm doing that. And I'm sorry for being long winded here. So I grab a call from my cousin. Well, so what happened was, so now I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do with my life. I'm like, I guess I don't have any more problems other than money because that was really the only weight on my shoulder. Um, and so I'm like driving. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try doing kids parties with DJs because the lady who ran the jewelry store was like, hey, I've got a lot of moms that, I have my own kid now. Maybe I'll introduce you to them and you can start DJing for their parties. So I tried it out. I bought some equipment and it was going fine. I mean, turns out moms can be pretty strong-willed is I think the nice way to say it when they're running their kids parties and they want things in an exact and certain way. And I just realized I don't know if this is for me specifically. I mean, being like, hey kids, that's fun and I can do that all day, whatever. But there's just something about the dynamics I wasn't a fan of. And also I was just a DJ to them and I was like, I don't like that feeling. I mean, I might as well work anywhere else and deal with that and not have to also be awesome the entire time I'm there. Um, so I'm walking away from that, and I remember parking my car, and I'm like, all right, maybe I should take a second to really think about what just happened in my life. And so, I meditate and fall asleep in my meditation. And when I wake up, I'm like, all right, I should go get something to eat. I come outside, and my car was stolen, and I hadn't taken my equipment out from there. So I was like, oh man, what's
the
going on?
car got stolen. Oh,
Yeah, it was
it's
just
like
the neighborhood
unbound.
I was in. Yeah, so I was like, all right, Gotta stay positive. I borrow
It's
my
just it
cousin.
was just like one bad thing after another.
Yeah,
Just
yeah. So I
oh,
borrow my cousin's bicycle and I'm using it. I take it to a cafe. I'm gonna do, some work on the laptop, figure something out outside of the house. And then when I come back out from when I'm done, someone stole the bicycle that I had. I had it chained up, but someone stole it. I was like, wow. And just after that, the next day, I'm like, wow, I could really use some good news. Um, Someone I was making music with, still trying to keep things running, hits me with news like, hey man, like I don't know what to tell you, man. I got a kid. I got to do things more seriously. It seems like you're just having fun with music and you're not serious about it. I was like, okay, I just put my name down on a lease for a music studio, but all right. I guess that's not serious enough for you. And he's like, yeah, he starts avoiding me. I'm like, all right, I can't take any more of this. Right. So I'm like, here's the key to, I want the keys for me. Here's your key. We're going to, I just want, I want to walk away from all this. I'm going to wait until this lease breaks and then I'm going to go, but I don't want anyone coming into the studio. What I didn't know is he had made copies and gave it to like his friends and his cousins and they started coming in, and at that point, I was already on my way out. I was thinking of leaving LA. So I already broke my lease with my apartment. I was like, I'll stay in the office. That way I lower my costs since now I'm the only one paying. And it didn't work out because then people started coming in while I'm trying to sleep. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, excuse my language, and I'm like, oh man, this is not looking good for me. So I get a call from my cousin shortly, somewhere around that time. And he tells me, hey man, I just moved to New York. I know you know that I've been out here for a while, and my girl's gonna go back to Russia for a bit to visit her family for like 3 months. We have the
mhm.
extra room if you want to get away. I heard all the news. You can come out here, man. I was like, dude, I'm so
To
down.
Russia,
No, 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 to New York. Sorry,
New York.
he was in New York. His girl decided to go to Russia, right? I'm
Okay,
like, dude, I'm down. I've never even left LA. I don't even own a passport. I was like, but I need to get the hell out of here. I'll get a job right away. I'll pay rent. He's like, hey, just get over here, right? So I show up and, like I promised, right away, I go down to this office called Central Casting. It's background acting. You're just the person like with a backpack walking across the high school scene in a movie or something, you know what I mean? But it paid
okay.
money, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm just looking around. I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to afford to live in this city doing this work, this job. So I look around and I see all the advertisement and I realize there's money in ads. These companies have money, they gotta have money to hire people. So I do a little bit of reading on general practices of marketing, digital marketing, SEO, and so I learned the vernacular like any good actor does. and and I just started applying. And I had my experience as a store manager on top of that. So when I go in for a couple of interviews for internships, one of those interviews turns into a job. They're like, "Hey, forget the internship. Let's get you a job."
Nice.
And I get that call while I'm on set for Orange is the New Black as like the person crossing the street or whatever. And I'm like, I'm so down. I'm there. So that really begins the education of like where all my digital marketing and understanding of everything works. That company Ajax Union CEO at the time was Joe Applebaum. It still is. And it's because of him a lot of like what I started to become took place. I'm there, I'm learning, I'm watching what he's doing, I'm watching what the company is doing. There's a few changes in leadership, but overall, those people were like family to me at that point because they really took care of me. They took an interest in my life story, what I was doing. They made sure I was okay. And then eventually, when they offered me a promotion that was like really hard to pass up, I had already in my heart been like, if I could do this for this company, I could probably do this for myself, self-employed. And so I'm honest about things like that. And I told him that. And he was like, all right. And this is like, 3, 4 years later. I'm trying to save us the time here. And he's like, that really sucks, man. We have a lot of hopes for you. I was like, I know, but if I'm being honest, this is what's in my heart. He's like, all right, man, if you feel like going out on your own, let me know how I can help. I appreciate you letting me know. Will you help us just make the transition? Of course, make the transition. And I get the crazy idea that I'm not just going to stop working there, but I'm going to move back to Los Angeles. Right? No plan. Just the same way I moved to New York, I'm moving. And like it was way more
Wow.
affordable in Los Angeles anyways.
It's not easy to just move from one city to another. I mean, I know I've done it myself, but yeah.
That's because I'm not smart. That's why. so, so,
You're pretty smart.
yeah. So I show up, and I inconvenience another cousin of mine, as little as I possibly could. I told him, hey, I just need to find an apartment again, right? And I didn't want to stay there much longer than I had to, and I couldn't find an apartment I could afford. So I ended up getting an office somewhere in downtown in a really bad area in the jewelry district, and I was just living in like a box with no windows in an office. It was supposed to be an office, but I got the gift of gab, so I got in. There was a bathroom down the hall, but it smelled like straight hookah everywhere. It wasn't clean. I would never take anyone there, right? And I had a lot of respect for the jewelers, so I was like, whatever, man. I was like, it is what it is. I'm paying my dues. I'm starting a business or whatever. I showered at the gym down the street, and then I got a co-working space. And I get a call from Joe Applebaum, and he's like, "Hey man, how's it going?" I'm like, "Not good." It's like, "Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be easy, man. Otherwise, everybody'd be doing it." I said, "Yeah, but like, what do I do, man? I can't seem to get customers." He's like, "I'm gonna make some introductions for you, and you're going to get these calls terribly wrong, but I want you to know why you got them wrong as you try to pursue the act of convincing them to give you money for your services." Right. And so, sure enough, I got it really wrong. Did a lot of like back and forth role play with him on the phone as well, of like what a customer would say yes or no to. And he didn't take it easy on me, but it was all well worth it, because
Mhm.
eventually I was talking to CEOs. He's like, all right, now you're ready. So he makes one introduction to a couple of people at Entrepreneur Organization, telling them I'm going to help them launch their podcast. And I didn't know it at the time, but they were like, all right, I can, he's an upstart. I'll give him some money, definitely cheaper than I would pay for a whole agency to take care of me. But he could use the experience. I could use the cheap labor. And yeah, it's an entrepreneur world. He'll learn a lot from this. So I'm doing that, but I do it so well. They introduced me to more people at their global chapters. Oh, my light went off. Sorry about that. And so then what ends up happening is they once I get introduced to the global chapters, they start telling me about their ambitions to like a higher quality production of things. And I'm like, okay, so you want it like How I Built This by NPR, but you they put out one episode a month and it's highly produced. You record like multiple episodes and put out multiple episodes a week. Unless you have the production budget for it, it's not gonna, well, no, but you can do it, right? Even though I had done a lot of episodes for them already and even helped them launch their podcast in Mexico, helping them with the edits, at the end of the day, they had a vision that didn't match their budget. And at some point, I couldn't keep a sustainable living doing what they were doing for what they were paying me, doing what I was doing for them for what they were paying me. Great people, they had their own hands tied, right? And I'm still in touch with many of them. It just didn't make sense.
Mhm.
But a great organization. I mean, you need to have like $1.2 million of annual revenue alone to be able to join the group. It's a
Wow.
great group of entrepreneurs. Very, very similar to some of the organizations that what the organization I met you through, right? Bellwether. Very similar in its structure. Um,
So you had to earn like 100,000 per month to be
yeah,
part of this organization.
yeah, and that's because there's a lot of benefits to being part of the organization, and you don't want someone in there who's like all they're doing is trying to sell you and ask you like to help them. And unfortunately, it's just the way the world works there, right? And they have a certain quality of the organization they were trying to run. Again, I took nothing personal, and I knew why they were using me. Like just like I was using them to build experience. So I got lucky. It was a good show, and I learned a lot from that. And I met a lot of people through that. And I had work to show to move forward. From there, I started launching websites, etc. Gigs. I was doing gigs at wholesale, as if you will. Um, and somewhere along the way there, I get in contact with someone on Twitter, letting them know that they were like, "Hey, I'm looking for a podcast host." I'm like, "I do that. I usually only do the editing or whatever, but I could do that." And so I respond to this guy on every social platform possible, just in case he missed my message. And he's like, okay, I got you, man. He jumps on a call with me. He's like, there was like two other people I was going to talk to, but I get a good feeling about you, man. And this guy's name is Andrew Metal. And so he brings me on to the show that he has on Entrepreneur Magazine, which is called Action and Ambition. And this show is awesome, man. I mean, I'm talking to really successful entrepreneurs, like beyond like the just because. you make 1.2 million doesn't necessarily mean you also have the clout that comes with being successful. Like there are plenty of people who make a lot of money and nobody knows who they are, right? But these people had some clout and they were on the magazine. I was meeting PR agencies, and eventually people started asking for specifically me to interview them instead of him or anybody else who might be doing it. And then the PR agents wanted to sit in on my calls. And I was like, oh, we don't usually let people sit in. They're like, no, I mean, I hope you don't mind. I'll turn off my camera, my mic. And I started realizing I'm doing something different. I don't know what it is. But I'm doing something different. And everyone walks away. Wow, it was the best interview I ever had. I'm like, really? you know, you mean that? Yeah, no, seriously. You also helped me really understand how I've been on a couple of other shows where I show up and it's like there's specific questions they're going to ask. And then if I answer something that they were going to ask, they're like, oh, you answered a question I was going to ask. Can we just start over? Like really awkward feeling on the show. And I was
It
like,
wasn't intuitive. It was like being on the flow and kind of like that, right? So
yeah. And so I was like, okay, I started paying attention. I started talking to the PR agencies about like, hey, why don't I work with you to onboard your clients so when they show up to a podcast like Entrepreneur Magazine, uh, they're not ill prepared and they can just come out the gate looking awesome, sounding awesome. Okay, so I started doing that deal. And then Andrew Meadows was like, hey man, we got an opportunity with Inc. Magazine. I want you to launch the podcast here. I'm like, sure. And my agreement with him, it was a handshake, so it wasn't like it was written down or anything. But at that point, I'd done quite a number of episodes, and I helped launch this one. We did like 20 episodes for the show, but my face wasn't on anything, and my name wasn't on anything. So it was like he was the one that did all the interviews, and that's my own fault for not like getting a better contract. But basically, what ended up happening was Inc. Magazine had a change in CEO just as the show launched. And when they saw that like the person doing the interviews isn't the person who's on the thing on the cover art and the one that's saying is hosting the show, what's going on, that started causing all kinds of problems for him. And,
he should have given you the credit. I mean,
bless
come on.
him. It's not like he didn't, but he also, he's like, he just kind of just omitted that. Right. So, but it is what it is. It's okay. Cause, he paid me money. So whatever, not a lot of money, but he paid me money, and my expectation was that we would have conversations about how my name would be on the articles when they're published or this or that. But again, I don't take any offense to it. I have to learn that when it comes to business, and for anybody listening who's an upstart, you have to be able to set your conditions as early as possible, and don't do any work until those conditions have been met. And that's something that it's a bad habit of mine. My heart goes out. I'm trusting and I'm like, yeah, we'll get it started and I'll go all in only to find later, oh yeah, yeah, we'll do the thing. So always have your conditions in place. That's what happens when you're naive and inexperienced, it is what it is. What are you going to do? In business, in capitalism, if you can get the better side of a deal, you should. I'm
I know,
not
but
saying it's
I know,
right. As I'm not
but
saying it's right.
but in the circles that we run in, like there's an honor thing, like
Sure,
just because you
sure.
can do something doesn't mean that you should. So like, yeah, just because it wasn't written in the contract doesn't mean that that
Yeah.
person shouldn't have like had like some sort of
I
fair.
mean, I think for them it was like, well, you're expanding your network. I'm paying you some money, and you're doing something for fun, like you're hosting. I can imagine the story went something like that, and it wasn't malicious. It just is what it is. That's
No,
I
yeah,
should I should have struck a better deal, but I did expand my network, and everyone knew that it was me that interviewed them, at least those companies and those people that I interviewed. So it's not like I lost anything, it's how you look at it. Sure. Would it have been nice SEO and branding for me to actually have my name on all those things? Absolutely. But I'm also not crying about it. Like eventually he got a bunch of other hosts, like 6 more, and great, good for him. He's an entrepreneur. He's building other things and he's delegating his labor, and he can do that. He's got it like that. So I'm not mad at that. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I really am. And it took me to the next level. And with that, I started working with the PR agencies really closely and working with their people. And this is around the time where I had met Jason on the process. Jason Miller was part of Bellwether here to do some podcasting. He was on Entrepreneur Magazine. I interviewed him, and then he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, man, can I interview you on my show?" I was like, "Oh, you have a show?" He did 36 episodes in like 2 weeks just to like have a history to show that he was serious. I was like, damn, you execute. He's like, oh yeah, I do that. And so he interviews me, and then at the end of the interview, he's like, "So I kind of only started this show because I was hoping you'd do this show with me." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, man, why not? What have you got to lose?" And I started telling him about my story. He's like, "We're gonna make something happen, man." Little did I know he was part of Bellwether and this and that. And good man, good man. He kept his promise. In 9 months, we built this strategic advisor board podcast to like 140,000 downloads per episode. But we were doing like 10 episodes like a day. Like it was insane.
Wow.
Like at some point we were like, we can't keep doing this. We started getting other people to be hosts. The same, very similar model, eventually. I had
Philip,
some help.
10 episodes a day is I don't know I don't know how you do it, man. That is an insane work ethic. I
Practice.
know I'm a podcaster and I'm doing like what I'm doing a once a week show, but 10 episodes a day. Wow. That's
Yeah. Yeah. So it was intense to say the least, man. But again, this is all like the condensed version. I'm trying to be mindful and respectful of the experience here. But I learned a lot through this process, and there's a lot of moments that I left out, but there was a lot of moments of doubt, fear, and there still are, and it's human to feel that way. But I'm also seeing things for the first time in a different light about some of the mistakes I made in business. And I feel like someone smarter would have learned sooner, how to set conditions in a certain way, certain boundaries. And someone who has more business knack probably would have made more money doing what I was doing with the opportunities that I had. But one thing is for sure, being able to tell the story this way, having the moments and the feelings that I had, I think that's an experience uniquely all to myself and my own naivete, right? Like it's only because I experienced it the way that I did that I could tell the story the way that I did. And I want the listener to know, like, you have to take exactly what happened to you and learn what of it is valuable, right? Because I could have told you all the little things that happened in between, but that's not valuable. There's no thread there. You're not going to take anything from it, right? And so I want you, because I do personal branding and things of that nature, I want you as a business owner or entrepreneur or whatever, if you're listening, or even you as the host, to really take stock, take the time to narrate what you've gone through, and then pick out the biggest moments, the most consequential moments, and find out that thread leads to the work that you do today. And that's your first version of your story that you tell on a show. And it's going to be compelling because you don't have to lie. You're not making something up. It's just your story. All I did was tell my story. I wasn't dropping insightful knowledge or this or that, but because experience breeds insight, all you have to do is share your genuine experience, and we'll be able to learn from that. It's the most valuable thing someone can do, is open up their heart, mind, their soul, and share it with you. And so if you can do the same, you can impact people the way you're possibly feeling now, you know?
no, totally. Like, I think that everything is ultimately a story, like a human experience, right? We're all going through our own individual stories, and ultimately it's all coming down to like the everything has an ultimate beginning and an ultimate end, but we're ultimately going on our own journey, learning our own lessons, and that is ultimately what life is about. Like we
Yeah,
think that it's all about like the status, the fame, making money, this, that. No, but it's a journey that ultimately is the real story. Like that's where we get all our lessons and like know more about ourselves. So that's at least my perspective on it.
absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah, but like you interview like more than 2,000 like
Yeah.
CEOs, entrepreneurs, and everything. Like, what is the common pattern that you saw amongst all of them? Like the common story or theme that you noticed while in all of these interviews that you did?
Yeah. So one thing that I learned really clearly as I started paying attention to that was that a good leader, a good CEO, a good entrepreneur, uh, is capable of a couple of things. In particular, they're transparent in how they come to decisions. And what do I mean by that? Uh, they're able to earn the trust of their team. When I think back to the stories of companies that really got their team to do incredible things, it was because they were able to explain the thinking behind why they would make decisions as a leader of the company. So if they were going to let someone go, they would actually address with the whole team, hey, look, regardless of what my lawyers are telling me, I want to have some transparency and let you guys know we're thinking of this as a reason. It's not a mystery that this person already knows. We already spoke with them, but we're thinking of doing this. Now, I personally want to hear from you if there's anything I'm overlooking that would change that decision. Do you feel like this is not a good decision? Right. And you got to be careful with that because your lawyers won't let you do that. But that's what the CEO found a way. These CEOs found a way to communicate that, not exactly those words, but to communicate in that way so that their team was always on the same page, right? There was a level of clarity between communication, whether it was establishing a new cultural norm in the office. It's like, look, I want the office to feel more like this because, and actually sharing that because, not, ladies and gents, today we're changing it to this. And all right, see you tomorrow, right? That's different. That's a different style of leadership. And it's important to be able to, that's the best example. It's not the only example, but that's the best example of how important it is to be able to communicate the thinking behind your decision making as a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other is all of them had said that the best decision they ever made in business was the partner they chose. So who you choose to spend, not even just like your actual business partner, but like your life partner, right? That makes a big difference in the way you are able to interact with your own business. Because if you have the wrong partner, they're like, why are you always spending so much time away? Or you name it, you can insert X complaint. It's there, right? As opposed to someone who understands and goes, yes, I understand, or maybe is also a business person and can enhance the process, the thinking, the vantage point, the insight. So that was the other thing that they said, right? Another one that they added was that also at the same token, those entrepreneurs, CEOs made it a non-negotiable that they took care of that relationship with their life partner beyond just like, oh, we have kids and so we're partners. No, they made sure to nurture that relationship and kept the flame alive. And that was important for a number of reasons. Obviously, if there's trouble at home, there's trouble in business. Just like if your employee is having trouble at home, there's trouble at work. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a entrepreneurs, these leaders, these successful ones have a real holistic view of how their life integrates. It's impossible for them to be like, business is business, personal is personal. The really good ones have a way of making all that work together.
It's all
And
holistic. It's
holistic.
it's interesting you say that because I've had a lot of people say you should never mix business with your home or mix business with pleasure. It's all you compartmentalize it. But here you're saying that it's holistic. That's the
Yeah.
thought.
So, I mean, you don't want to bring problems that are irrelevant to the house home, right? Like you can't like, oh, I had a bad day at work, so now I'm gonna. That's obvious, that, and no one needs to hear a lecture on that. It's not necessarily compartmentalizing. It's just knowing that it's not your family's fault, or it's not
Oh,
your
totally.
partner's fault, right? That's different. But like there's a company Wistia that I just saw an article out on LinkedIn like 2 days ago. Basically, what they did with their culture, because the pandemic made everything remote, they set up this thing called Coffee with the Founders, and every 2 weeks it rotates a number of like 20 of their employees. Pretty big company, uh, and they just randomly show up on a Zoom call and start talking just having coffee. No agenda, promise. No agenda, no ulterior motive, just getting to know some of the team because it's such a big company. The company you start with 10 people with isn't the same team that you're going to have when you hit 100 employees. It's just not. That's just the way things go. Right. And their whole thinking behind that, and they're explaining this, right, on LinkedIn and other videos that they're doing, is people complained that when work went remote, there was no more opportunity for the serendipitous water cooler running into and having an amazing chat with someone and getting to know someone new in the company. And they said, you can still have that, but you have to be intentional. So you see how they're explaining their thinking. You have to intend to randomly meet someone at your company. So they set up a system and a process for that, right? But again, it's the fact that they can even communicate that as that transparently is what makes them good leaders. Because now you're like, oh, Wistia, I'm gonna look them up. They sound like an interesting company. What an interesting culture that they have, right? So if you want your team to feel the same way about your own company, have that level of transparency. Let them in on why you're thinking what you're thinking and doing what you're doing. Sure, there's things that's not relevant to the graphic designer that is relevant to only the C-suite, but wherever it is relevant, wherever it can be made relevant, you should seek to close that gap, that distance between you and them, so that they have just as much a reason to protect the company as you do.
That is very interesting you say that. Actually, like my next question, I was wanted to ask you, but like which is connected to this question, and it's about like like you interviewed all these people, and they're telling you these things, but it's also combined with your own story about like you being an immigrant, like your dad being an immigrant, and then you also being an entrepreneur. Like the American identity is based on immigration and entrepreneurship, and it's also about like a self-actualization, a self-transformation process for Americans in general. Like, what is your perspective after interviewing all these 2,000 people, and also through your own life as somebody that went through hardships, on how Americans can basically attain their identity as Americans, like of being immigrants, entrepreneurs, and also realize the American dream, if
Right.
that makes sense.
And just so I understand, so this is related to anybody who comes from a background that maybe they're like first generation born in America, or literally came to America and wanted to start a
Yeah.
business, and how do they find and self-actualize into that American identity? Was that the question?
Yeah, what is your perspective on it? Like, how would they do that after like from your own story and like from all the 2,000 people that you interviewed?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what would be the process for them to do that?
Well, the good news is being American is not a qualifier for being an awesome entrepreneur, right? So that's the good news. After having interviewed over 2,500 people from all parts of the world, I mean, there's places I wish I could go visit, whether it's Bali, somewhere in Australia, somewhere in London, plenty of people in the States, of course, here in America, people in Mexico, believe it or not, Chile, you know, uh, you could name any part of the world. There's even people out in like we're talking Portugal, or people in Poland, whatever it is, no matter where it was, all of them had the same thing. They had a vision, right? They had a drive. They wanted to achieve something, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. Obviously, these are basics, but also most importantly is their vision was compelling enough for them to commit to it for 10 years, right?
Wow.
Now, often people will sit here and look, I need this advice as much as anybody else. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination successful, but I've talked to a lot of successful people, and I can't tell you this much. The ones that really did change the game for themselves, especially coming from somewhere else and coming to America and achieving that American dream, they knew that they were going to commit to this for like 10 years. There was a guy, pardon me
Most
for
most people don't even commit for like 10 months. Forget about
exactly,
10 years, bro.
exactly, exactly. but
That
that
is
but that's what it takes, right? Because the person who does have the commitment for those 10 years because they chose right, they were like, this is exactly what I want for me, right? That person has a competitive advantage because they're not going to get tired. They already know it's a 10-year game. Other people were like, I made 6 calls and one of them didn't, it's not working, I don't know, and then you just drop the ball and go somewhere else. Like,
so what
how
are you
much?
saying that what are you saying is that they have to have a marathon mentality versus a sprint mentality. Like
Absolutely.
they got to see it as a long distance race versus like 100-meter sprint or something like that. And
Yeah, and it's just the unfortunate truth. And you might get lucky and blow up, right? But don't bet on that. It's like I always err on the side of caution in the sense that I never believe I'm the exception to any rule. Often people tell me, but Philip, you're an exceptional person. I say, that's nice, but I'm just getting lucky. You know what I mean? To be quite honest with you, I am definitely not the exception to the rule, no matter what you tell me. I err on that side, but I'm also ready and willing to do whatever I got to take and go deeper on things. Right. Now, don't get me wrong, just like anybody else, and especially me, I'm very impatient. So that kind of advice and that kind of knowledge sitting in my head drives me crazy because I'm not the 10-year. I'm like, I'm gonna try this for 6 months, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Right. I've been there. I'm that person. Okay. So I need that advice just as much as anyone. Right. But that's what somebody who has that, it's a competitive advantage. They know that they're going to be in here for the long haul, 10 years at least. And if you can't see yourself doing this for 10 years, then pick something that you will. Right. And that's what I
well,
saw.
I just got to be honest. Most people don't even see beyond a month.
Yeah,
Like
I know.
forget about 10 years. But
And
yeah,
it's especially hard when you don't have money coming in to see anything beyond the day. I get that. I do.
so compelling vision with a 10-year compelling vision combined with the stamina to get it done and humility from what you're telling me because you just said like
100% humility. And let's define that, right? It's not like, oh, is there anything else I can do for you? It's not that kind of humility, being humble. And no, it's okay. There's some keys on my keyboard I've never used. I don't even know what they do. Flip the rock over, see what happens, see what it does. Have the humility to know that you don't know what that is and go out there and figure it out. That's the kind of humility I'm talking about. That's active humility,
the
you know?
irony is, Philip, it's common sense, but a lot of people don't apply that. Like that's what it takes to succeed. Like you have to try things out. You have to. It's kind of like a feedback loop, right? And then
Yes.
you got to go ahead and continue doing it. But most people, their ego gets hurt if they get through like a rejection or they fail the first time. So it's just these basics that lead to success, but they don't. They're not stressed enough, to be honest.
Well, it's because it's way easier to complain than it is to get results, right? So there's a book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee Adams. And the book's a great book. I think one of the most important things I got from it though, and it doesn't say it specifically, but if you're asking a question like, why is this happening to me? How come this never works? Whatever answer you get from that question, is it going to be useful to you? Likely not, right? But if you ask really productive questions like, okay, well, what do I want? Well, I want this business to work. Okay, what are you willing to do about it? The same thing could be said about relationships. Oh, why is my partner acting like this? Why do they do this to me? Okay, even if you got the answer to that, how is that going to do anything for you? It's not. That's a useless question, right? Forgive the quality of my tone, but that's what it is. So, what would be a more useful question? Okay, well, what do I want from this relationship? I want it to work out. What are you willing to do about it? I'm willing to have an awkward, uncomfortable conversation about my needs and my boundaries. You see what I'm saying? But I'm also going to be willing to understand their needs and their boundaries and see if we can actually make this thing work. So, what do you want? What are you willing to do for it? Sometimes it helps to ask other useful questions like, who is this for? What is this for? Right. But the point is, you're either actively accepting something, actively rejecting something, or actively confused. And if you find that you are confused, ask a relevant question. And if you don't know what question is relevant, ask a bunch of questions until you see one that you can actually do something with.
No, I mean, yeah, these asking questions do help you get to like that point where you can make that change, right? But Philip, I know you wrote this book called Pushing Past the Norm, and it's a self-development book. And we're talking about self-development. Like, can you tell me in the audience a little bit more about the premise of that book and what it's about?
Yeah, this book was totally a bucket list item, right? Like my whole life, everyone. It's ironic because I have a lot of my own problems, and by no means am I successful, at least in my own opinion. Uh, but a lot of people always come to me for advice, and I tend to give better advice to others than I do myself. And it's it's a
I
it's
mean,
a
a lot of
curse.
people would say that. Like, a lot of people would say that when it comes to others, they'll give advice. Like they
Right.
give advice, but
And I'm lucky enough that people actually trust me enough to share their problems with me, and they actually appreciate and act on some of the things that I said. So they always say the same thing to me: you should write a book. So after so many years of someone telling me that, I actually did it. And it was I wrote it just before the pandemic happened, so it was like
Philip,
2019.
if I interviewed 2,000 people, like I would write a book as well.
So this was before I interviewed 2,000 people, believe it or
Now
not.
you need to write a second book.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I'm going to call it conversational power, I think. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. But I wrote that because I having to like raise myself practically and stay away from drugs and gangs and all the opportunities that I had to do things that would have taken my life in a completely different direction. I figured it would have been easier if someone could have been there to actually help me understand those things. And since I didn't have my parents, I felt like writing this book that would sort of paint that picture and help. And I try to share my story to lend weight to the fact that, like, look, I had just as much reason as anybody else to say life isn't fair, and give up and go the wrong way. But I didn't. I don't know why I didn't, but here's what I've learned from taking that path. Here's what I learned about the difference between puppy love and someone that actually cares about you. You being infatuated with someone and someone not returning that energy, right? Here's what I learned about being resourceful with the people that you know. Here's what I learned about work ethic and what it means to have a job and what it really, like, what you can actually take away from it, regardless of what you do for a living. All the things that are important for you to learn as you come of age, right? And so I wrote that. And I'm like, great. I had a list of like all the Boys and Girls Club I was going to send the book to. I was hoping to speak to them. And then the pandemic happened and I got caught up with like trying to survive as a freelancer, like the flurry of that. And the book was published, but nothing ever really happened with it. My few friends and family bought it. I think I sold like 65 copies total. But I now have a chance. I recently ran into somebody who does speak with Boys and Girls Club. And I gave them the audiobook version of my book. And they're like, dude, we got to share this with kids. So the good news for me is that that's still going to happen a lot later than I anticipated, but that's still going to happen. And I don't care if I don't make any money from it. My main goal is to help kids who come from a similar background like mine, or people who are having a hard time adjusting to the growing pains of life, hopefully arm them with tools. They're actual frameworks for how to face the oncoming traffic that is the obstacle of life, you know?
Mhm. No, that's awesome. Yeah, like when I hear the word pushing, the phrase pushing past the norm, just I think of like breaking of societal conventions or just pushing past the limit, going the extra mile. Like
Yeah.
that was like something that was really important to me when I read this book by Napoleon Hill. He wrote like a second book or something, and the first chapter was going the extra mile, and that usually leads to success, you know? So
Yeah, and that's really, it's funny. I crowdsourced the entire making of the book. I asked everyone, "Hey, which cover do you like better? Here are the names I'm thinking. Which one do you like better?" Over time, and everybody was gung ho on it on social media, on Instagram in particular. Everybody was excited. I was like, "You all told me to write a book. You're going to help me make this happen." So they all chose that name. I had a bunch of different names, but that's the one that they chose. And when I looked at it, it's, the normal thing to do is to react to life. So pushing past it would mean taking a step back for a second and choosing how you're going to react to it. And this book has a framework for every occasion you could think of in your life as you're growing up.
that's awesome, Philip. So, Philip, is there like any work or project that you're working on right now that you'd want the audience to get a glimpse of?
Yeah. So aside from the fact that I'm still doing that podcast with Jason, every so often when we get an interesting guest, now we don't have to do it every 10 episodes anymore. So if you're an awesome, interesting person and you're looking to get your story told, I'd love to have you on, just like I'm here with Cosmo, right? Like I just love to just get to know you. Aside from that, though, I'm working with Shelby Joe Long of the Strategic Advisor Board. We're launching a new program, and I've been putting together a webinar to break down the inner workings of how to develop your personal brand. People don't like the word brand. It don't like, no, let me correct myself. People don't like spending money on anything with the word brand in it. Okay. And I understand that. I do. It's what it really is. But another way of looking at it is thought leadership. And I can help you get all your ducks in a row for your thought leadership. And this webinar is going to sort of give some insights into that. And Shelby is amazing. She's got a whole team that will help deliver on that. So it's not just me doing all the work all the time now, but I will still be the strategic arm of that thing, helping push that. And so we're launching that pretty soon. It's waiting on me. I'll be honest, but we're going to be launching that pretty soon. So please hit me up on LinkedIn and get in touch and sign up to that, because if you're doing anything in business, it's going to be relevant for you, for your narrative, your positioning. It's all the stuff that I use when I'm working with PR agencies. It's even the way I think while I'm listening to someone's story on a podcast, so that I can help regurgitate what they just said in a way that's concise and helps the listener reinforce the importance of whatever lesson just took place. Right. So a lot of those tools are going to be turned into a framework that you yourself can use on yourself, or you can work with us and we'll help you with it.
Awesome, Phil. So how can our audience like connect with you so that they can get to know more about you and your work?
Yeah. So again, I'm actually active on LinkedIn. It's the one network I actually spend a lot of time on. Sometimes I'm on Instagram, sometimes on Twitter just to like spend some time. But then I'm like, oh, what am I doing on here? I don't want to be here anymore. So I jump back on LinkedIn like I'm supposed to. But follow me on there. Connect with me. I think you have to actually hit the three buttons instead of the follow. You can follow me, but you can connect with me by hitting the three buttons, expanding the menu options, and I should be there with the connect. And I actually respond. It might take me a while. Ever since I started podcasting, it's been a lot of DMs and connection requests, mostly from people trying to sell me video and audio editing for a podcaster. But it's a real thing, right? But I do actually actively look through it, and I'd love to connect with you there because that is where I will make the announcement for the sign up for the webinar. If not, you can still add me on all the other platforms. I'm as Phillip Lanos, and that's two L's in Phillip, Phillip, Lanos, everywhere on social media, or you can go to philiplanos.com and it should have a link to anything that's relevant about me anywhere there.
That is awesome, Philip. I'm really glad that you took the time to like come on this show, and I really enjoyed interviewing you today. And you're basically an extraordinary American, and I would love it to have you back on the show at a later time.
Yeah, man, are you kidding me? Anytime. Again, I really appreciate you inviting me. I think the most valuable things, the biggest compliment someone could pay another person is spending time with them because we don't get time back. Right. So, with that said, I appreciate the compliment you paid me as well.
No, I appreciate you too, Philip. And I want to conclude this show by telling my fellow extraordinary Americans that, hey, there's an extraordinary within each and every one of us, and it's our duty to awaken it and unleash it. So until next time, bye for now.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you for watching Extraordinary America. If you like what you see, please do subscribe to our podcast and share it with others. Remember that the best investment that you can make in your lifetime is in your own financial education, for it is knowledge that truly sets you free. Also, remember that your purchasing power is being diluted through inflation, and then the practical thing to do is to protect the loss of your purchasing power by investing in precious metals or the right cryptocurrencies. Also, never forget that you are an extraordinary American. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.